Under the burning orange sky of Arcanus Prime, the war had taken a turn no one expected. The human outpost had been holding its ground for weeks, but now the enemy army moved across the dunes like an unstoppable tide. Captain Daniel Cross stood in the trench, his rifle heavy in his hands, watching the horizon for the first sign of movement. Sand whipped against his face as the wind carried the distant roar of alien war horns. The battle was coming, and there was no time left to prepare. The soldiers beside him were tense, their eyes fixed on the swirling dust in the distance. Orders had been simple: hold the line until reinforcements arrived, but no one knew if reinforcements would come at all. The air was thick with the metallic scent of the weapons and the faint hum of the shield generators. Every man and woman in that trench knew the enemy they faced was unlike anything Earth had fought before. A sudden flash of gold broke through the haze. Daniel narrowed his eyes, adjusting his scope. At first he thought it was another wave of enemy infantry, but the figure was alone, striding toward the human line. She wore shining armor that caught the sunlight in brilliant reflections, and a crown rested upon her head. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, her movements slow but deliberate, and there was no weapon in her hands. The human soldiers raised their rifles, but Daniel lifted his hand to signal them to wait. The figure stopped a few meters from the trench. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Her gaze locked with Daniel's, and even from a distance, he could see the strange intensity in her eyes. It wasn't the cold stare of an enemy general or the pride of a ruler. It was something personal. Without breaking eye contact, she stepped forward again, her golden cape trailing in the sand behind her. Daniel climbed out of the trench, ignoring the shouts of his men. His boots sank into the soft sand as he closed the distance. The alien woman soldiers stood far behind her, watching but not moving. She stopped when they were just an arm's length apart. Daniel noticed how her braids shimmered in the sunlight, how her armor was battered yet regal. Then her gaze fell to his right hand, the one gripping his rifle. Her expression changed. Her breath caught, and her gloved hand reached forward, almost hesitantly. She touched the back of his hand, brushing away the sand to reveal the scar that ran across his skin. For a moment, she froze, her lips parting as if she had seen something impossible. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke words that made Daniel's chest tighten. "I finally found you, human." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He had never seen her before, and yet her voice carried a weight that made it impossible to dismiss. The soldiers behind him shifted uneasily, their rifles still trained, but neither he nor the woman moved away. Her words hung in the air between them, fragile yet heavy. Questions filled his mind, but none found their way past his lips. She stepped closer, her hand still resting on his. "This mark," she said, her voice trembling just enough for him to notice. "It belongs to the one my people have searched for through lifetimes." Her eyes glistened, though whether it was from the wind or something deeper, he couldn't tell. The desert around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them standing there, connected by a scar and a truth neither yet understood. The desert wind carried the echoes of that moment, long after the words left her lips. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing to make sense of what she had said. Around them, the human soldiers shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene or hold their fire. The alien troops in the distance remained still, watching as if they too understood the weight of what was happening here. Her hand lingered on his for a moment longer before she slowly withdrew it. Daniel could see her eyes searching his face, as though trying to confirm something only she could see. "You do not remember me," she said quietly, and there was no accusation in her tone, only a deep sadness. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but the words would not come. He felt as though some long-forgotten truth was just out of reach. A shout from behind broke the strange stillness. Sergeant Lewis called out, urging Daniel to return to the line, his voice carrying a sharp edge, but Daniel ignored him. The woman before him was unlike any enemy he had ever faced. She carried herself with the dignity of a queen, yet there was vulnerability in her eyes that stirred something deep within him. Her armor, though gleaming, bore dents and scratches that told the story of countless battles. "Why are you here?" Daniel finally managed to ask. His voice sounded rough, even to himself. The woman's gaze did not waver. "Because," she replied, "without you, my people will fall. And without my people, your kind will not survive what is coming." Her words were heavy, each one landing like the strike of a hammer. Daniel could hear the distant hum of engines, the sign that more enemy forces might be on their way. She stepped aside and gestured toward the horizon. Through the haze, Daniel saw massive shapes moving in the distance, too large to be infantry. They were war machines, their silhouettes dark against the burning sky. "These are not my soldiers," she said firmly. "They are the scourge, and they will not stop until everything you know is ashes." Her voice carried a grim certainty that sent a chill through him. Daniel's instincts told him to be cautious, to question her motives, but something deeper told him she was telling the truth. The look in her eyes wasn't the gaze of someone playing a political game. It was the look of someone who had seen entire worlds burn and refused to let it happen again. "If I go with you, what happens to my men?" he asked, his grip tightening on his rifle. "They will be safe," she said without hesitation. "I will call off my army. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to come now." Her words were not a request, yet they lacked the force of a command. It was as though she knew he needed to decide for himself. The scar on his hand throbbed faintly, as if reacting to her presence, and Daniel felt a strange heat spreading through his chest. Behind him, Lewis shouted again, this time with more urgency. "Captain, they're getting closer. We have to fall back." Daniel looked between his men and the woman, torn between duty and a pull he could not explain. The machines on the horizon grew clearer, their massive legs crushing the sand beneath them. The alien woman extended her hand once more, her expression steady and unyielding. "Choose, human," she said. "But know this, if you walk away, now you will not get another chance." Daniel's heart pounded as the sound of the approaching war machines grew louder. The sand beneath his boots trembled with each distant step they took. His soldiers were still shouting orders to one another, preparing to retreat or fight, but their voices seemed muffled compared to the weight of the choice before him. The alien woman's hand remained outstretched, her golden armor glowing in the harsh sunlight. He glanced back at his men. They were loyal, battle-hardened, and looking to him for direction. The thought of abandoning them made his chest tighten, yet there was something about the woman's words that felt undeniable. She spoke as if she knew him, not just as a soldier, but as someone tied to a much larger destiny. The scar on his hand burned again, as though urging him forward. Daniel took a step toward her, and her eyes softened, a flicker of relief passing over her face. She turned her head slightly, and in the distance, her soldiers lowered their weapons in silent acknowledgement. The tension in the air shifted, but it did not ease. Every second felt like it could be the moment when the approaching machines would open fire. "What are they?" Daniel asked, his voice low but steady. The woman's gaze shifted to the horizon where the dark shapes moved ever closer. "They are destroyers," she replied. "Not of my people, not of yours, but of all life they touch. They serve no empire, no cause. They only consume." Her voice held no exaggeration, only the sharp truth of someone who had seen what they could do. He studied her face for any sign of deception, but found none. Instead, he saw the faint shadow of old pain hidden behind her regal composure. Whatever history they might have shared, he realized, it was bound to something far greater than either of them. "Why me?" he asked. "Why this scar?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. She stepped closer, the golden edges of her armor catching the light. "Because you are the one who carries the mark of the last accord," she said. "A bond forged between our peoples long before your world learned to travel the stars. That bond was sealed in blood, and you bear its proof." She spoke the words like a truth carved in stone, leaving Daniel struggling to comprehend their meaning. The engines of the destroyers roared, louder now, shaking the ground beneath them. Daniel's men began to fire toward the shapes, though the distance was still great. The alien woman didn't move, her focus entirely on him. "If you come with me," she continued, "we have a chance to awaken the accord. With it, we can stop them. Without it, nothing you know will survive." Her voice did not waver. Daniel felt the weight of every choice he had ever made pressing down on him. He could retreat with his men and fight a losing battle, or step into a future he couldn't yet understand. The soldiers around him were shouting for orders, the machines loomed closer, and still, the woman's hand remained outstretched toward him. The moment to decide had come, and there would be no turning back. Asterisk. Daniel's breath came slow and heavy as his mind wrestled with the decision. Every instinct drilled into him through years of command screamed to stay with his men. Yet there was something in her voice, in her eyes, that pulled him toward her. The battle behind him felt distant now, like a faint echo against the sharp clarity of the moment before him. He tightened his grip on the rifle, feeling the weight of the metal and the heat of the desert sun against it. The scar on his hand pulsed again, almost like a heartbeat. Her gaze dropped to it once more, her expression tightening with urgency. "The accord is not just an agreement," she said. "It is a living oath. It chose you long before you were born." The words sent a strange chill up his spine. A sharp explosion erupted in the distance, followed by a chorus of shouts from the trench line. The destroyers had fired a warning volley, their weapons sending plumes of sand into the air. Daniel's men ducked for cover, but the woman didn't flinch. Her soldiers stood like statues, waiting for her signal. She looked at him as if the chaos around them was nothing compared to the choice hanging between them. "What happens if I refuse?" Daniel asked, his voice quieter now. She didn't hesitate with her answer. "Then your scar will fade, your people will die, and the accord will be lost forever. The scourge will not stop here. They will spread until there is nothing left but silence." Her tone carried the weight of a verdict, not a threat. Daniel looked back toward his men one last time. Their faces were set in grim determination, ready to fight to the end. He knew them, trusted them, and the thought of leaving felt like tearing away a part of himself. Yet he also knew that if she was telling the truth, their courage alone would not be enough to stop what was coming. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. The shouts from his men grew louder, disbelief mixing with desperation. He could hear Lewis calling his name, demanding an explanation. Daniel ignored it, stepping forward until he stood just inches from the woman. Her hand was still extended, steady as stone. Without looking away from her eyes, he placed his scarred hand into hers. The air between them seemed to shift, as if the desert heat had been replaced by something far older and deeper. A faint hum rose around them, not from any machine, but from the ground itself. Her grip tightened, and for a moment, Daniel felt as if he was standing in two places at once, the battlefield and somewhere vast and star-filled. She spoke softly, but her words carried like a vow. "The accord is awake." Behind them, the destroyers slowed their advance, their towering frames halting mid-step. The alien soldiers fell to one knee, heads bowed in silent reverence. Even Daniel's men paused, their weapons lowered slightly as they watched the strange scene unfold. The woman turned to face the oncoming threat, still holding his hand, her voice steady. "Now we fight together." The desert battlefield seemed to hold its breath as Daniel stood beside her. The massive war machines remained motionless, their dark forms looming like shadows against the blazing sky. The sudden stillness was unsettling, but Daniel felt a strange calm settling over him. Her hand in his was warm, steady, and somehow grounding in the chaos surrounding them. She raised her free hand and spoke in a language Daniel did not understand. The alien soldiers behind her rose to their feet in unison, their movements sharp and disciplined. From their ranks, a group stepped forward, carrying weapons unlike anything Daniel had seen before. They glowed faintly, as if alive, and emitted a soft hum that resonated in his bones. Daniel's men watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some tightened their grips on their rifles while others lowered them slightly, unsure if this was still a standoff or something entirely different. Lewis called out again, his voice edged with frustration. "Captain, what's happening?" Daniel glanced back, but his answer was meant for everyone. "We're changing the rules of this fight." The woman's gaze never left the enemy machines as she spoke to him again. "The accord will give us the strength to breach their shields, but it will demand something in return." Daniel frowned at her words. What does it want? She met his eyes briefly before turning back to the threat ahead. "It wants well, to stand together, even when every instinct tells us to fight alone." A low vibration began to ripple through the ground, and Daniel realized it was not from the destroyers, but from the alien weapons charging. The glow from their cores brightened, casting long, shifting shadows across the sand. The heat of the desert mixed with the rising energy, creating an almost electric tension in the air. His instincts told him the moment to act was drawing close. Her soldiers moved with precision, forming a tight perimeter around the two of them. Daniel noticed how they kept glancing at the scar on his hand, as if it was more important than the rifle slung over his shoulder. It was clear that in their eyes he was no ordinary soldier. Whether that was a burden or a shield, he couldn't yet tell. The destroyers let out a metallic roar that rattled Daniel's teeth. Their weapons began to hum, charging for an attack. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand without realizing it. She shifted her stance, her armor catching the sun in blinding flashes. "When the accord calls," she said, "you must answer without hesitation." Her voice was steady, but he could feel the urgency pressing against every word. Then the first shot came. A beam of searing light cut through the air toward them, but it struck an invisible barrier just meters away, exploding into harmless sparks. The woman's soldiers unleashed their weapons in response, streams of energy tearing into the destroyer's armored legs. Daniel could feel the force of the accord through their joined hands, a power that was not entirely his yet demanded every part of him. The ground shook as the accord's energy surged through Daniel and the alien woman. Every pulse of light from their linked hands seemed to echo across the battlefield. The barrier protecting them shimmered with each incoming strike, holding firm against the relentless assault from the destroyers. Daniel could feel his muscles tense, but the fear that had been gnawing at him earlier was gone. Her soldiers moved with flawless coordination, weaving between blasts and striking with precision. Each impact against the destroyers sent plumes of black smoke curling into the sky. Daniel's men, seeing the shield hold and the enemy stagger, began to rally. They moved from cover, firing their rifles in controlled bursts, aiming for the gaps opened by the alien weapons. The woman's voice rose above the chaos, speaking in her language. The energy between them flared brighter, bathing the sand in gold and white. Daniel's vision blurred at the edges, but the scar on his hand burned with a heat that was almost comforting. It was as if the mark itself knew this was the moment it had been waiting for. One of the destroyers stumbled, its towering frame collapsing into the sand with a thunderous crash. The impact shook the battlefield, sending waves of dust into the air. A cheer erupted from both human and alien soldiers alike. For the first time since the war began, Daniel felt they were not just surviving, they were winning. But victory was not yet certain. The remaining destroyers adjusted their formation, their weapons focusing entirely on Daniel and the woman. The concentrated energy strikes hit the barrier harder, cracking its shimmering surface. Daniel's breath came heavier now, the drain of holding the Acord's power pressing against his body. She tightened her grip on his hand, her eyes fierce. "Do not let go," she said. He nodded, his focus sharpening. Every ounce of his will went into keeping the connection alive. The barrier shuddered again, but this time, instead of breaking, it pulsed outward. A wave of energy rippled across the sand, knocking the nearest destroyer back several meters. Daniel could feel the power roaring through his veins, as if the Accord had chosen to reveal its full strength at last. The alien soldiers pressed the attack, their weapons cutting into the weakened armor of the machines. Human rifles joined, in each shot finding its mark with uncanny precision. The destroyers began to falter under the combined force. Smoke, fire, and the glare of energy blasts filled the air, but Daniel stood his ground, anchored by the woman's unwavering presence. With a final command from her, the Accord's energy surged in one last blinding flash. The light swept over the battlefield, and when it faded, the remaining destroyers lay silent and broken in the sand. The wind carried away the smoke, revealing a field littered with wreckage and the exhausted but standing soldiers of both sides. Daniel looked at her, their hands still joined, and realized the war had just changed forever. The battlefield was quiet now, except for the low hum of damaged machinery cooling in the desert heat. Human and alien soldiers alike stood among the wreckage, their weapons lowered, their eyes fixed on the two figures at the center of it all. Daniel could still feel the Accord's energy coursing through him, though its intensity had faded into something steady and warm. The woman released his hand slowly, her gaze holding his for a moment longer. "It has accepted you," she said softly. There was a calm in her voice now, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Daniel studied her face, wondering how many years she had been searching for the one who bore the mark. She seemed relieved, but also burdened by the knowledge of what this meant. Lewis approached cautiously, his eyes darting between Daniel and the alien leader. "Sir, what in God's name just happened?" Daniel looked at his men, their faces marked with exhaustion, but also with a spark of hope he hadn't seen in weeks. "We just made an alliance," he said. "One that might be the only thing keeping any of us alive." The alien soldiers began tending to the wounded on both sides without being asked. It was strange to see them working alongside humans, their movements efficient and unthreatening. Daniel realized that whatever hostility had existed before this moment had been tempered by shared survival. The battlefield that had once divided them now bound them together. The woman turned toward the horizon, where the last traces of the Scourge's presence were fading into the distance. "They will return," she said. "And next time, they will bring more." Her words were not meant to frighten, but to prepare. Daniel understood the truth in them. This victory had been hard won, but it was only a battle in a much larger war. "What does the Accord require of me now?" he asked. Her eyes met his again, and there was a weight in them that made his chest tighten. "You will come with me," she said. "To my world, to stand before my council, and to unite our forces fully. The mark you carry is not a weapon alone, it is a promise that must be honored." He felt the gravity of her request, knowing it would mean leaving Earth behind for an uncertain path. Yet he also knew he couldn't turn away from it. His men needed a leader who could see beyond the next battle, and she was offering him the chance to shape the war's outcome. The choice felt less like a decision and more like an inevitability. Daniel glanced once more at the scar on his hand, its lines faintly glowing in the sunlight. The desert wind stirred, carrying with it the mingled sense of sand, smoke, and the beginnings of something new. "Then we go," he said, his voice steady. The woman gave a single nod, and together they began walking toward whatever future the Accord had chosen for them. The journey from the battlefield to the alien vessel was unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. The ship loomed above the sand like a monument from another world, its sleek curves shimmering under the sun. Human and alien soldiers alike stepped aside as he walked with her toward the ramp. The air was heavy with the scent of scorched metal and dust, yet there was a strange sense of peace after the chaos of battle. Inside, the corridors glowed with soft golden light, and the hum of the engines felt alive beneath his boots. Alien symbols lined the walls, their meaning unknown to him but somehow resonating with the mark on his hand. She walked beside him in silence, her presence steady, as if guiding him towards something he had been meant to see all his life. When they reached the command chamber, an enormous circular room with windows stretching to the stars, he stopped to take in the view. The desert below was already shrinking into the distance as the ship ascended. It struck him how quickly a war zone could vanish from sight, leaving only memory and the weight of what had been decided there. She turned to face him, the light from the stars casting a glow across her features. "From this moment, you are bound to the accord," she said. "Your victories will be shared. Your losses will be ours as well. You will not fight for one world alone anymore." Her words settled deep within him, solid and unshakable. Daniel stepped closer to the viewing glass, watching as the curve of the planet came into view. His reflection stared back at him, scarred and weary, yet carrying a fire he hadn't noticed before. "If this is the path," he said quietly, "then I'll see it through." His voice carried more conviction than he had expected, and she gave a faint nod of approval. Moments later, alien officers entered the chamber, bowing slightly to both of them. They began to speak in her language, their voices low but urgent. She listened, then turned to Daniel. "The Scourge have moved on another system," she said. "We go there next. You will see why the Accord must not fail." Her tone left no room for doubt. He understood now that the scar was not simply a mark of fate, but a key to uniting their peoples. Whatever ancient promise had been made, it had survived long enough to reach this moment, and now it was his responsibility to uphold it. He met her gaze, seeing not just an ally, but someone who believed in him when he didn't fully believe in himself. The ship's engines roared as it jumped into faster-than-light travel, the stars stretching into lines of light. Daniel felt the weight of Earth behind him and the enormity of the galaxy ahead. The war was far from over, but for the first time, he did not feel like a soldier, merely following orders. He was part of something greater, and he would see it to the very end.